It's a stark, frigid midday in Minneapolis. The blizzard has retreated, but the cruelty hasn't. In a snow-covered suburban yard, a 5-year-old boy named Finn is dragged out by his stepfather, Silas Creed, and forced to hold out his small, bare hands. A thin charging cable cracks down with a brutal smack. The child's desperate scream is swallowed by the cold wind. When Officer Elias Thorne and his K9, Ragnar, answered that 911 call, they weren't responding to a routine disturbance. They were heading straight into a life-or-death confrontation. The moment Ragnar shattered the sunroom glass and burst out onto the snow to shield that fragile boy, the stage shifted from domestic abuse to a desperate rescue. What happens next will make you believe in the quiet miracles performed by those sworn to protect. Before we begin, tell me where you are watching from. Drop your country in the comments below. If you believe no child or animal should ever face fear alone, hit subscribe now and share this story with someone who needs hope. The January blizzard had ceased its fury, but the cold remained, sharp and absolute. It was a bleak noon in Minneapolis. The sky was a vast, unforgiving expanse of pale gray, but the light was strong enough to illuminate the pristine white blanket of snow that covered every surface. Officer Elias Eli Thorne, 38, navigated his patrol SUV through the slow-moving traffic of Linden Hills, the midday silence broken only by the hum of his vehicle and the rhythmic crackle of his radio. Eli was tall and heavily built, his uniform jacket zipped high against the chill, his gray-blue eyes scanning the world with the practiced vigilance of a beat cop. Beside him, Ragnar, his 4-year-old German Shepherd K9, sat alert, his black and silver coat thick against the cold. Unit 404, report to 512 Powderhorn Avenue. Emergency services received a direct 911 call from a neighbor, identifying extreme domestic violence, child victim. Caller reported screaming and sounds of striking. Advised immediate response. Day shift patrols are tied up on I-35. The call hit Eli like a physical blow. Child victim, midday. 404 copy, en route to Powderhorn, he responded, activating the lights and siren. The drive was fast and frantic. When they pulled up to the address, the contrast was jarring. A tidy, middle-class home, deceptively peaceful, with snowmen figures adorning the porch. Eli left Ragnar secured in the running SUV and approached the house on foot. Before he could reach the front door, a woman, Doris Hemlock, burst from the house next door. Doris, late 60s, her silver hair pulled tightly into a bun, wearing a thick, colorful knitted sweater and sturdy snow boots, ran towards Eli, her face etched with panic. "Officer, the backyard! Hurry!" Doris cried, pointing a trembling, mittened hand toward the side gate. "He dragged him out! I heard the boy scream. Silas is beating him." Eli didn't waste a second. He vaulted the low side gate, his heavy boots crunching through the untouched snow, Ragnar's frantic barks echoing from the police SUV. He burst through the unlocked side gate and into the backyard. The scene was horrifying, starkly illuminated by the unforgiving midday light. Silas Sly Creed, the bulky 40-year-old stepfather, stood over Finn Vance, the 5-year-old boy. Finn was wearing only a thin, summer-weight sweatshirt and pajama bottoms, shivering violently. His thick winter coat lay discarded in the snow near the deck. Silas held a coiled, thick USB charging cable in his hand, his face a horrifying mask of desperate, drunken fury. "Hold your hands out, you little liar! You want to know what losing money feels like? Hold them out!" Silas bellowed, his voice grating and raw. Finn was sobbing uncontrollably, his small, bare hands extended, palms up, toward the furious man. The skin was already red and chapped from the cold. Silas brought the thick cord down with a brutal, sharp smack across the boy's open palm. Finn shrieked in searing pain. "Creed, drop the weapon! Police, get away from the child!" Eli screamed, drawing his sidearm, the cold metal glinting in the pale sunlight. Silas froze, momentarily blinded by the sudden appearance of the armed officer. Eli saw his window. He slammed his hand against the button on his belt. The heavy-duty lock on the K9 compartment of the patrol SUV instantly disengaged. "Ragnar! Seek!" The command was all the German Shepherd needed. Ragnar launched himself out of the SUV, traversing the short distance in seconds. Instead of navigating the gate, Ragnar chose the most direct line to the threat, the large sliding glass door of the house's sunroom. The powerful dog hit the glass with controlled brute force. The entire glass panel shattered with a deafening crash, scattering shards of ice and glass across the deck. Ragnar, unharmed, vaulted over the debris and sprinted into the deep snow of the backyard. He planted his immense black and silver body directly between the still swaying Silas and the whimpering Finn. The canine's teeth were bared in a fierce, silent snarl, directed solely at the abuser, his amber eyes burning with focus. The sight of the powerful canine emerging from the shattered glass and snow, acting as a living, breathing shield, broke Silas's resistance. He dropped the cable. Eli tackled Silas with professional force, driving the man face first into the cold snow. Eli swiftly cuffed the struggling man. Eli then dropped to his knees in the snow beside Finn. He ripped off his own thick patrol parka and wrapped the small, freezing body entirely. He gently pried open the boy's small hands. Both palms were marred by angry, red whelps and cuts from the cable. "It's okay, buddy. It's over," Eli murmured, scooping up the child. Ragnar stood guard over the cuffed Silas, his body unwavering. When the first patrol unit arrived, their lights flashing brightly in the snow, Eli transferred the secured Silas and the collected evidence, the cable and the discarded coat, to the arresting officers. He left Lorelei Vance, who was now running out of the house, screaming hysterically and accusing the officer of brutality, to face the detectives and CPS. Eli carried Finn to the awaiting ambulance, a strange hero in the bright, cold Minneapolis noon. The blinding white of the Minneapolis noon had turned into the sterile, unforgiving glare of the Hennepin County Medical Center's emergency room. Eli Thorne stood vigil beside the trauma bay, the faint but persistent beeping of the cardiac monitor, the only consistent sound. The immediate danger of hypothermia was past, but Finn Vance remained utterly silent. His small 5-year-old body, now wearing a hospital gown and tucked under a blanket, seemed impossibly fragile. His gaze was fixed, not on his IV line or the medical personnel, but on Ragnar. The K9, his massive black and silver frame, a strange contrast to the thin, pale blue sheet on the floor, lay patiently beside the bed, his head resting lightly on his paws, his amber eyes half closed but intensely focused. Eli had argued fiercely with the hospital administration, invoking regulations regarding K9 therapeutic support for critical child trauma cases, a necessity that was immediately understood when Dr. Amina Khan witnessed the child's profound calm in the dog's presence. Dr. Amina Khan, the pediatric trauma specialist, was a woman whose late 40s carried an air of quiet, professional authority. Her dark hair was severely pulled back, and her wire-rimmed glasses only magnified the deep concentration in her eyes. She approached Eli, clipboard in hand. "The systemic hypothermia is stable, Officer Thorne. We've got him warm. But those hands," she gestured to Finn's small hands, which were now heavily bandaged with gauze and medical tape. "The bruising is severe, deep contusions consistent with repeated striking by a narrow, rigid yet flexible object. The skin on the palms is broken in multiple places, indicating targeted, intentional violence. This will require several days of observation, officer, not just for the physical trauma, but the psychological effects of being exposed to sub-zero temperatures as punishment." Eli nodded, his own guilt a dull ache in his chest. He meticulously documented the scene for Dr. Khan, the snow, the discarded winter coat, the motive. He retrieved the bagged evidence, the thick USB charging cable, for the detective's formal collection. The tense silence of the trauma bay was shattered when the swinging doors burst open. Lorelei Vance rushed in, escorted by a uniformed patrol officer. Lorelei, 36, looked like a magazine cover gone wrong. Her blonde hair was perfectly coiffed, but her expensive trench coat was spotted with mud and snow, and her beautiful face was distorted by tear streaks and desperate panic. "Finn! Oh my God! My baby!" Lorelei cried out, attempting to reach the bed. Ragnar immediately lifted his head, his black lips pulling back slightly in a silent, potent snarl. He did not move a muscle, but the warning was unmistakable. Eli quickly stepped in front of her. "Stay back, Lorelei. You need to speak with the CPS worker and Detective Cole. You are not allowed near Finn without supervision," Eli ordered, his voice flat and authoritative. "You animal! You brute!" Lorelei shrieked, her voice suddenly switching from maternal grief to raw anger. "You and your beast broke into my home. You assaulted my husband. You will pay for that glass door. This is your brutality, officer, not Silas's." Your husband was beating a 5-year-old child in the snow, forcing him to stand barefoot, striking his hands with a cable. You were inside. You are complicit, Lorelei, Eli countered, his gaze unflinching. Your priority is not your glass door. It is the criminal charges you both face. At that moment, Detective Marcus Cole and Ms. Eleanor Hayes entered. Cole, the internal affairs detective, was imposing in his charcoal suit, his silver-streaked beard neatly trimmed, his sharp, cool eyes taking in every detail of the confrontation. Ms. Hayes, the CPS worker, was a woman in her late 20s, small and quietly determined, wearing practical winter boots and a thick wool coat. Cole immediately intercepted Lorelei, redirecting her to a private room. Mrs. Vance, I advise you to remain calm. I am Detective Cole, and Ms. Hayes here is from Child Protective Services. We need your statement regarding the events at your residence. While Lorelei was being led away, Ms. Hayes approached Eli. Officer Thorne, thank you for your immediate action. I've spoken with the neighbor, Doris Hemlock. She gave a full, damning account. I also spoke with Ms. Chloe Jenkins, Finn's kindergarten teacher, who reported multiple previous concerns. Eli handed Ms. Hayes the bag containing the charging cable. Ms. Hayes, the abuse is chronic. Finn needs a safe haven immediately. Cole returned, his expression non-committal. Officer Thorne, we are proceeding with charges against Silas Creed for aggravated assault and child endangerment. Now, about your K-9's unauthorized forced entry. While the result was positive, I still have to document the use of force. Can you justify the destruction of private property and the deployment of a K-9 in a non-lethal scenario? Detective, the child was suffering from targeted intentional assault and critical exposure to sub-zero temperatures. Every second mattered. Ragnar bypassed the barrier to protect the victim. He used force to save a life, not to take one. I authorized the deployment because the immediate threat was visible through the window, and time was critical, Eli stated firmly. Cole simply nodded, accepting the justification without comment. CPS has placed Finn in emergency protective custody. Given the mother's lack of intervention, Finn cannot remain with her. We are seeking immediate placement. Eli looked at Finn, who was still staring at Ragnar, a thin, almost imperceptible film of tears in his eyes. He thought of his own quiet, disciplined life, his empty house in Linden Hills. He looked at the dog, the one constant source of protection the boy seemed to trust. He made a profound decision. Detective Cole, Ms. Hayes, I'm requesting temporary placement for Finn. I am a sworn officer, I have a secure residence, ample resources, and the child has bonded to my K-9 partner, who is trained for protection and therapy. Allowing him to go to a stranger's foster home right now could compound his trauma. I pulled him out of the snow, and I intend to keep him safe until the court decides. Ms. Hayes looked at Eli, then at the massive protective German shepherd lying patiently on the floor, and finally back at the fragile boy clinging to the dog's presence. She scribbled a note on her clipboard. It's unconventional, Officer Thorne, but the bond is clearly stabilizing. We will process your application immediately. The sterile white of the hospital had been replaced by the subdued fluorescence of the precinct's 3rd floor, but the tension clinging to Elias Eli Thorne was far colder than the Minneapolis blizzard outside. He was seated in a cramped, temporary office, his uniform now swapped for a dark civilian tactical fleece, reviewing Silas Creed's initial arrest file. The immediate danger was neutralized. Silas securely lodged downtown, but the moral and legal vortex surrounding Finn Vance had only just begun. Eli had spent the better part of the afternoon navigating the labyrinth of bureaucracy, coordinating with Ms. Eleanor Hayes from CPS to finalize the unusual temporary protective placement, a decision made largely because Ragnar's presence was the only thing calming the traumatized 5-year-old, and providing a detailed report to Detective Marcus Cole, who, despite his outwardly meticulous cool, had quietly offered his support for Eli's K-9 deployment justification. Cole, a man whose silver-streaked beard and weary, intelligent eyes spoke of years spent watching human ugliness, had simply advised Eli, "Guard your flank, Thorne. A man like Creed doesn't fall alone, and his lawyer will target your weakest link, which is currently that boy." Cole's warning proved prophetic when a certified letter arrived moments later, delivered by a frantic precinct clerk. The document was a blistering motion, filed by Silas Creed's defense counsel. The firm was imposing, but the motion itself was a predictable, brutal attack on Eli's character and legal position, aimed squarely at dissolving the emergency custody order. The lawyer, Vincent Graves, mid-40s, sleek and tailored, whose reputation was built on defending white-collar criminals and exploiting loopholes, argued that Eli Thorne, a stranger and a violent law enforcement agent, was utilizing his K9 weapon to emotionally manipulate a traumatized child and illegally gain custody. Citing Eli's unauthorized entry and the destruction of private property, the sunroom glass, as evidence of his unstable judgment, Eli recognized the textbook deflection strategy, making the hero look like the villain. His focus, however, was not on defending himself, but on the deeper rot surrounding Silas. Eli began tracing the financial ghost-haunting creed. The initial arrest report included the betting slip and a dozen empty mini bottles of cheap bourbon found in the truck, but Eli suspected a deeper, more organized criminal element was driving the desperation. Using off-duty access and favors from the department's financial crimes unit, Eli pulled a detailed, if unofficial, history on Silas Creed. The man's income, a sporadic, under-the-table landscaping gig, was utterly incompatible with his high-stakes poker debts and his and Lorelei Vance's upscale powder-horn lifestyle. Eli cross-referenced the gambling losses with recent large, unexplained deposits into a joint checking account held by Lorelei and Silas. The deposits, irregular but substantial, came from a series of shell companies linked to small, distressed businesses in suburban St. Paul. Eli called in a deep favor from an old contact in the neighboring district, Salazar Cruz, a veteran detective in his early 50s, thick-set with dark, perpetually tired eyes and a distinctive, neatly trimmed goatee, known for his relentless pursuit of organized crime networks. "It smells like a low-level loan shark recovery scam, Eli," Cruz reported back an hour later, his voice a gravelly whisper over the secure line. Silas leans on the small business owners, likely with threats or muscle. They get desperate, take bridge loans from the wrong people, our target, and Silas gets a cut for the heavy work. The chilling part was the link to Lorelei. Eli found evidence of wire transfers from Silas's accounts to Lorelei Vance, flagged as house maintenance or tuition fund, dating back over a year. Lorelei, who had looked away while her son was beaten, had clearly been complicit in benefiting from the illegal funds generated by Silas's desperation. Her expensive coats and her passive luxury were financed by the pain Silas inflicted on others, culminating in the terror inflicted on Finn. Eli felt a cold certainty. Lorelei Vance was not just a terrified mother. She was a willfully ignorant enabler benefiting from fraud and violence. This discovery fueled a fresh wave of protective instinct in Eli. The legal battle was secondary. His only mission was ensuring Finn never returned to that poisoned environment. After securing a preliminary meeting with his own legal counsel, a pro bono family law attorney arranged through the Police Benevolent Association, Eli drove his SUV back through the afternoon gloom to his own home in Linden Hills. Eli's house, a modest, well-maintained two-story bungalow, was clean and highly organized, reflecting his disciplined, solitary life. A stark, almost sterile environment that now felt utterly unprepared for a 5-year-old child. He found Finn in the enclosed sunroom, which was now a small, temporary intake center thanks to Ms. Hayes and CPS. Ms. Eleanor Hayes, the CPS worker, had been efficient and kind, setting up a cot, securing essential items, and providing a small box of toys. She was now briefing Eli, her posture weary but determined. "He hasn't spoken a word, Officer Thorne. He just shivers. He won't let go of this." She gently indicated Ragnar's leash, which Finn clutched tightly even as he slept fitfully on the cot. Ragnar, the K9, lay curled protectively at the base of the cot, a massive, comforting presence. The bond is everything right now. He views the dog as his sole protector, not you, not me. You need to leverage that trust. Eli knelt by the cot. Finn's small face was pale. His hands, swaddled in gauze, rested on Ragnar's silvery black fur. Eli gently stroked the K9's head. Ragnar's amber eyes opened, meeting Eli's gaze with a look of shared, fierce dedication. The K9 emitted a single puffed whine, acknowledging the silent contract they had made. "This child is our mission." Eli spent the evening focused solely on establishing a fragile stability. He put on his most comfortable, worn flannel shirt and made a simple meal: grilled cheese, the universal comfort food, which Finn refused to touch. Eli sat patiently, reading a picture book aloud, the sound of his steady, resonant voice filling the sterile silence. He kept a respectful distance, knowing that right now he was still the uniform, the unknown stranger who had suddenly invaded the child's world, no matter how heroic the entry. The key, as Ms. Hayes had noted, was Ragnar. When Eli offered Ragnar a small piece of cheese, the dog gently nudged it toward Finn's hand. Finn's eyes tracked the movement, a tiny flicker of curiosity replacing the terror. He watched Eli's hand, then Ragnar's muzzle, and finally, tentatively, he reached for the food. It wasn't trust yet, but it was the first crack in the emotional armor, bought not by a man, but by the quiet, unshakable loyalty of a K9. The war against Silas and Lorelei was still raging in the courts and in the shadows of Minneapolis, but in this small, sunlit room, a fragile new foundation of safety had just been laid. The fragile peace Eli Thorne had established in his organized, if somewhat sterile, Linden Hills bungalow was under constant siege, not by winter, but by the relentless pressures of the coming legal battle. After 2 nights of fitful sleep, during which Finn Vance remained physically tethered to Ragnar's leash, Eli understood that the psychological trauma ran deeper than any visible wound. The child still refused to speak, communicating only through soft shivers or sudden, terrified clenches of his small bandaged hands. To address this, Ms. Eleanor Hayes of CPS had arranged immediate trauma counseling, introducing Eli and Finn to Dr. Clara Hayes, no relation to the CPS worker, but possessing a similarly calm, grounded demeanor. Dr. Hayes, a woman in her mid-50s, with kind eyes framed by practical square glasses and dark salt and pepper hair pulled back into a sensible braid, favored comforting, oversized wool cardigans and trousers, projecting an air of patience that seemed to absorb the frantic energy of trauma. Her approach was subtle, leaning heavily on play and expressive arts rather than demanding verbal confessions. Eli drove Finn and Ragnar across the icy, pale landscape of Minneapolis to Dr. Hayes' small, welcoming office, a space filled with the scent of cla and lavender, far removed from the cold steel of the precinct. During their first session, Ragnar was the quiet, constant presence. Dr. Hayes gently encouraged Finn to draw or build anything he felt, placing a sheet of thick white paper and a box of brightly colored crayons before him. Finn sat motionless for 20 minutes, his eyes darting between the door, Eli's face, and Ragnar's massive silent form. Finally, urged by Ragnar's soft, insistent nudge of his cold nose against the child's knee, Finn began to draw. His small, trembling fingers clutched the black crayon first. He drew rapidly, a large, sprawling, chaotic black shadow that consumed most of the page. It was a terrifying mass, thick and hostile, clearly representing Silas Creed. Eli leaned in, the short brown hair on his temple grazing the shoulder of his dark tactical fleece, and watched as Finn then selected a silver crayon and, with immense care, drew a thick, unwavering line right through the center of the black chaos, culminating in a stylized, protective shield around a tiny, barely there blue stick figure. The shield was unmistakable. It was Ragnar, all fierce loyalty and solid mass, his protective snarl rendered in jagged silver lines. Dr. Hayes quietly confirmed Eli's instinct. The dog was Finn's entire coping mechanism, the tangible representation of safety in a world that had betrayed him. The fragile progress of that day was shattered the moment Eli returned home. A chilling event confirmed Detective Cole's warning. Someone was watching. Parked 3 blocks away, hidden partially by a snowdrift, was a black, nondescript sedan, which immediately sped off when Eli's patrol SUV approached. Later, tucked into the weather stripping of Eli's front door, he found a small, folded note, typewritten and devoid of identifying features, bearing a chilling single line. The custody order doesn't mean the debt is paid. It wasn't just Silas or Lorelei. It was the loan sharks, the organized element Eli and Detective Cruz were investigating, sending a clear, terrifying message. Finn was leverage, and Eli's involvement was costing them money. Eli immediately secured the note as evidence, his disciplined composure cracking slightly under the weight of this new, external threat. His home, formerly a fortress of personal order, was now compromised. The decision was swift, professional, and agonizing. Finn had to be moved immediately to a non-police affiliated safe house. Eli knew exactly where to turn. Doris Hemlock. He called Doris, the elderly neighbor who had made the initial 911 call, and discreetly briefed her on the danger and the temporary custody situation. Doris, far from being frightened, embraced the request with the fierce, unflinching determination of a woman who had seen too much and was ready to fight back. "Bring that poor boy right over, Eli," she declared over the phone, her voice a comforting, steady alto, thick with a gentle Midwestern accent. "And bring that wonderful dog, too. No one messes with a child in my neighborhood." Doris Hemlock, nearly 70, was the very embodiment of resilience. Sturdy and slightly round, she wore a thick, multicolored, hand-knitted cardigan over sensible trousers and polished lace-up ankle boots, moving with the energetic briskness of someone 30 years younger. Her silver hair was neatly pinned, framing a face lined with deep empathy and a dry sense of humor. Her home, a small, meticulously kept Cape Cod cottage, was the antithesis of both Eli's disciplined sterility and Lorelei's manufactured luxury. It smelled richly of baked cinnamon and old wood, filled with comforting clutter, embroidered pillows, stacks of well-worn paperbacks, and framed photos of a life lived fully. It was a haven of genuine warmth. Eli carefully drove Finn and Ragnar to Doris's house under heavy cover, the move executed with tactical precision usually reserved for witness protection. Finn, clutching Ragnar's leash tightly, seemed marginally less terrified upon entering the cottage, the smell of baking immediately relaxing his rigid posture. As Ragnar settled onto a thick rug near the stone fireplace, his low sigh of contentment signaling his approval of the safe environment, Eli helped Doris unload a few essentials. Doris watched Finn, whose hands immediately retreated into the sleeves of his new, oversized hoodie. "Lorelei always prioritized the wrong things," Doris murmured to Eli, her eyes focused on Finn, but her voice sharp with judgment. "She didn't used to be like that, not until Silas and all his fancy promises." Eli, standing beside her, tall and imposing in his fleece, his persistent stubble lending his face a weary harshness, listened intently. She worried about the paint on her kitchen cabinets more than she worried about the bruising on Finn's legs. "I've seen that boy walking alone in the yard, sitting on the steps, cold and quiet, for hours, punished for what Lorelei called being messy. Silas was a monster, yes, but Lorelei, she just chose not to see, chose her credit cards over her son's well-being." Doris's words hit Eli hard, confirming the cold reality he had discovered in the financial ledgers. Lorelei Vance was financially complicit in Silas's crimes and emotionally complicit in Finn's abuse, a willful participant in the cycle of violence and neglect that had nearly killed her son. The image of the Lorelei he knew, beautiful, self-absorbed, now coalesced with the financial trail of tuition fund deposits. His mission shifted from merely protecting Finn to fighting a protracted legal war against both the abuser and the enabler. He knew Lorelei would fight ruthlessly to protect her image and her access to Silas's money, and she would use Finn as her ultimate shield. Leaving Finn with Doris and Ragnar, Eli left the comforting warmth of the cottage to return to the cold, stark reality of the legal battlefield. The boy was safe, but the cost of his protection was rapidly climbing. The tranquility of Doris Hemlock's Cape Cod cottage, with its constant scent of cinnamon and the heavy weight of Ragnar's protective presence, offered Finn Vance physical safety, but Eli Thorne knew the true battleground was the courtroom and the fractured mind of the boy's mother. The morning after moving Finn, the blizzard gave way to a brief, blinding burst of winter sun, highlighting the tracks of the black sedan still etched into the frozen ground near Eli's abandoned home. The sight was a stark reminder of the organized threat against his protective custody. The anonymous note had sealed the urgency of Finn's relocation, but the legal war still demanded Eli remain the visible target. The attack by Silas Creed's attorney, Vincent Graves, was gaining traction. A formal motion was filed with the Hennepin County Court accusing Eli of kidnapping, illegal surveillance, and misuse of police resources for personal gain. Eli needed ironclad evidence against Lorelei Vance to completely sever her influence, and more importantly, to demonstrate to the court that her complicity was not merely passive. Eli met with his pro bono family law attorney, Ms. Sophia Chen, at a neutral law office overlooking the frozen Mississippi River. Ms. Chen, a woman in her late 30s, was sharp, intensely focused, and dressed in a meticulously tailored dark gray suit. Her dark hair was cut into a severe asymmetrical bob, and she wore thin, frameless glasses that magnified her keen, assessing gaze. She projected an aura of quiet, formidable competence, possessing the tenacity of a bulldog wrapped in silk. Eli, his persistent stubble and tactical fleece contrasting sharply with her polish, laid out the evidence from Detective Cruz, the financial trail linking Lorelei to Silas's loan shark recovery scam. Lorelei's defense will be simple, Sophia, Eli stated, pushing the bank printouts across the dark mahogany table. She'll claim she's a battered wife, a victim of Silas's madness, unaware of his illegal dealings, and that the money was for her and Finn, not crime. She'll play the fragile mother card, leveraging the court's sympathy. Ms. Chen calmly reviewed the transfers, her lips pressing into a thin line. We need to prove willful ignorance, that she benefited directly from the crime while ignoring the red flags, and that she prioritized those funds over Finn's safety. Her refusal to stop the abuse, Officer Thorne, is the core of her complicity, but the money makes it malice. Her eyes lifted to meet his. The court has granted Lorelei a supervised visitation next week. This is our opportunity, but it's also highly dangerous. Silas will have instructed her. She will try to manipulate Finn, to poison the well. We need to prepare Finn, but we cannot coach him. Preparing Finn, however, proved a monumental challenge. Though safe in Doris's cottage, under the constant guard of Ragnar, the 5-year-old remained deeply withdrawn. The only consistent therapy was the daily art therapy supervised by Dr. Clara Hayes, which Eli monitored closely. Finn continued to draw. The black shadow was still dominant, but now a new element appeared. Small, scribbled figures of Lorelei, always standing beside the shadow, her hands covering her ears, refusing to see or hear the chaos. This artistic depiction of Lorelei's willful deafness was powerful but inadmissible in court without verbal confirmation. The fear surrounding the upcoming visitation was palpable. Ms. Hayes warned Eli that any attempt by Lorelei to threaten or manipulate Finn could cause a complete regression. Eli recognized the potential for disaster. The loan shark's note made it clear. Lorelei was under extreme pressure to regain leverage. He knew, instinctively, that Lorelei would target Finn's deepest fear. When the visitation day arrived, the atmosphere was thick with tension. The supervised visit was held at a sterile public library meeting room, overseen by Ms. Eleanor Hayes of CPS, who sat silently, clipboard in hand, documenting every interaction. Lorelei Vance arrived dressed impeccably, a perfectly fitted white wool coat, carefully applied makeup, and a calculated expression of fragile sorrow. She looked like a grieving socialite, carefully calibrated to win the sympathy of the observing CPS worker. Eli and Ragnar waited in a separate room, the canine restless, sensing the deep distress radiating from the adjacent room. The first 10 minutes were a polite disaster. Lorelei tried to hug Finn. The boy recoiled, shrinking into the corner of the sofa. She tried to show him pictures. He refused to look. Finally, driven by desperation and likely Silas's instructions, Lorelei dropped the act of maternal grief. Her voice, though low and calculated for Ms. Hayes's benefit, carried a chilling, manipulative edge. "Finn," she began, leaning in, her eyes momentarily losing their feigned softness, "I know that bad man told you things. That bad officer. He lies, sweetie. You and I, we have to stick together, right? Otherwise—" She paused, her tone dropping to a sharp, menacing whisper. "Otherwise, they will take you away forever. And that dog," she spat the word, glancing pointedly at Ms. Hayes, "will be put in a cage and then they'll make him disappear. You don't want your hero doggy to disappear, do you, Finn?" Finn's small, pale face immediately crumpled. His eyes widened in absolute terror, fixed on the closed door behind which Ragnar waited. He began to shake violently, the familiar, silent shiver returning, worse than before. Lorelei had struck the nerve, the threat to his only trusted protector. Ms. Hayes immediately intervened, terminating the visit. "That's enough, Mrs. Vance. The visit is over." Lorelei rose, her composure utterly shattered, her face twisting in sudden, ugly fury as she was led out. "You'll regret this, Officer Thorne," she hissed, as Eli appeared in the hallway, Ragnar straining at the leash, sensing the threat. "You think you're saving him? I know where your precious dog sleeps." The encounter, though brief, provided Eli and Ms. Chen the critical emotional evidence. Lorelei was not a passive victim. She was an active, manipulative conspirator, willing to exploit her son's deepest fears to protect her access to Silas's criminal funds. As Eli comforted the hysterical Finn, who only calmed when Ragnar was immediately brought into the room, smothering the child with his heavy, comforting presence, Eli knew he had to move fast. Lorelei had threatened Ragnar, revealing her desperation and confirming her alignment with Silas. Eli now had the emotional capital. Now he needed the legal hammer. The next day, Eli and Detective Cruz leveraged the new evidence of Lorelei's complicity with the Minnesota Organized Crime Task Force. They connected the deposits in Lorelei's account to a larger wire fraud investigation involving Silas's loan sharks. The task force agreed to a coordinated takedown, focusing their efforts not only on Silas Creed, but also on the shell corporations depositing funds into Lorelei Vance's name. Eli's personal crusade to protect Finn had merged with a major federal wire fraud investigation. The small, bruised hands of a 5-year-old had unwittingly become the catalyst for dismantling a complex criminal ring. Eli provided Ms. Chen with the final damning piece of evidence. Lorelei was not merely standing by, she was taking the payoff. The transition from the comforting warmth of Doris Hemlock's cottage to the austere marble halls of the Hennepin County Courthouse felt less like a change of venue and more like entering a battlefield. The light of the Minneapolis winter sun, which had briefly offered a deceptive warmth, now refracted coldly through the tall, arched windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing over the polished oak benches. The custody hearing was set in motion, pitting Eli Thorne, the lone, unaffiliated officer and reluctant temporary guardian, against Lorelei Vance and the aggressive legal strategy of Vincent Graves. Eli, dressed in a sharp, dark navy suit that felt stiff and unfamiliar after weeks in tactical fleece, sat beside Ms. Sophia Chen, his gaze steady but weary. Ms. Chen, impeccably tailored and radiating calm competence, kept her dark eyes fixed on the opposition. Across the room sat Lorelei Vance, who had transformed yet again. She was no longer the hysterical mother Eli had witnessed outside the sunroom, nor the calculated manipulator of the supervised visit. Today, under the precise direction of Graves, she was the picture of fragile, misunderstood elegance. Dressed in a modest, dove-gray dress, her blonde hair pulled back softly, her expression one of quiet, tearful martyrdom. Beside her sat Vincent Graves, mid-40s, tanned and immaculate, in a bespoke charcoal suit, his silver cufflinks glinting under the harsh courtroom lights. Graves exuded practiced confidence, the kind that promised ruthlessness veiled in legal jargon. He was flanked by Silas Creed, who, having been released on bail thanks to Graves's efforts, looked sullen and defeated, his face still bearing the signs of his struggle with Eli, but now cloaked in a respectable, if ill-fitting, blue suit. The proceedings began with Graves's opening statement, a brutal surgical attack on Eli's character. Graves painted a picture of Eli Thorne as an emotionally detached cool-boy cop who had unilaterally broken the law to steal a child from his loving mother. "We have here, Your Honor," Graves began, his voice resonating smoothly through the silent courtroom, "a disturbing abuse of power. Officer Thorne, a complete stranger, initiated an illegal, violent, K-9-assisted entry into private property, shattering windows, terrorizing a mother, and kidnapping a young boy, all based on an unsubstantiated report and a personal vendetta. He has since exploited the child's trauma, using his weaponized dog, a trained attack animal, to coerce and isolate him from his family." The argument was persuasive in its calculated malice, completely shifting the focus from Silas's violence to Eli's methodology. The initial witnesses were crucial. Dr. Amina Khan testified first, her professional testimony cutting through the legal drama. Her detailed medical report confirmed the severity and intentional nature of the injuries to Finn's palms, consistent with repeated striking by a narrow, flexible object and the dangerous hypothermia. Graves attempted to discredit her, arguing she was influenced by law enforcement, but Dr. Khan's quiet authority was unshakable. Next, Doris Hemlock took the stand. Despite her age, Doris was sharp and unflinching, her voice steady as she recounted the 911 call, the sounds of the attack, and her direct observation of Lorelei's prior neglect. "That boy was cold and quiet for hours, just staring at the snow," Doris stated, meeting Lorelei's tearful gaze without blinking. "She chose to look away." The defense, however, introduced its own expert, Dr. Harlan Reed, a clinical psychologist and Graves's paid expert witness. Dr. Reed, a man in his late 60s, impeccably academic with a shock of white hair and a professorial tweed jacket, testified that the K-9's presence was psychologically damaging. His voice was calm and persuasive as he argued that Finn's clinging to Ragnar was not bonding, but a classic Stockholm Syndrome response, where the victim bonds to the nearest source of control after a traumatic event. In this case, the dog of the officer who initiated the violence. Eli felt a cold wave of frustration wash over him, knowing the lie was legally sound and potentially devastating. The most anticipated moment came when Eli took the stand, not just as the arresting officer, but as the de facto guardian seeking permanent custody. Graves was brutal in his cross-examination, hammering Eli on his unauthorized actions, his failure to call for backup immediately, and his unprecedented decision to take protective custody himself. "Officer Thorne," Graves sneered, leaning into the mic, "you admit you are not a licensed foster parent, yet you unilaterally decided to remove this child from his mother's care and install him, illegally, in your home, where he is now kept under the constant, overwhelming gaze of a trained attack dog. You are trading one form of terror, Mr. Creed's, for another, your own military force. Is that not correct?" Eli stared back, his voice level and strong. "No, sir. I responded to an imminent threat of severe bodily harm and death by exposure, confirmed by 2 witnesses. I utilized my canine partner to breach a final barrier and shield the child. Finn doesn't see Ragnar as a weapon, Mr. Graves. Finn sees Ragnar as the one who stopped the monster, and my only goal is to ensure Finn has a chance to heal, a chance his mother willfully denied him for months." The court recessed for lunch, the outcome still bitterly uncertain. Lorelei had played her role perfectly, and Graves had expertly shifted the blame. Eli met with Ms. Chen and Detective Cole, who had been observing from the back. "Graves' Stockholm claim is strong, Eli," Cole warned, his silver beard resting on his chest as he spoke. "It's making the judge nervous. We need to counter it. We need something raw." "We have the financial evidence against Lorelei, Detective," Ms. Chen reminded them. "The task force will act soon on the wire fraud." "Soon isn't now," Cole countered. We need a legal, undeniable tie between Lorelei and the abuse that overcomes the mother-child bond argument." That evening, Eli and Ragnar returned to Doris's cottage. Finn was withdrawn again, the stress of the day settling over him like a shroud. Eli spent hours on the phone with Detective Cruz, frantically reviewing Silas's accounts one last time. Cruz had found a key detail, a highly irregular, automated weekly payment that Silas had set up to a blind account, labeled simply insurance. It wasn't money going out, but information. Eli realized what it was, a dead man's switch. Silas was using the payments to ensure his gambling debts were covered if he went down, but Eli suspected something more immediate. Suddenly, Ragnar lifted his head from the hearthrug, his ears pricked. He let out a low, distinct woof, looking intently at a small object Finn was clutching. Finn, sitting beside the dog, was staring intensely at his small hands, which were now bandaged, but one small finger was poking out. Clutched between his thumb and forefinger was a small, crudely drawn figure, Finn's usual drawing of Lorelei, but this one was different. This figure held a tiny, oversized object, drawn in black crayon. It was a replica of the USB charging cable. The picture, created during a moment of intense stress, was a raw, immediate expression of the truth. It was the crucial, undeniable evidence Eli needed. Finn's hands were the target, and Lorelei knew the weapon. It was raw, uncoached, and terrifyingly clear. The true image of Lorelei's complicity. The air in the Hennepin County courtroom, on the morning of the final hearing, was brittle with expectation, colder even than the lingering winter chill outside. Every bench was filled, the case having drawn local media attention due to the unique intersection of child abuse, organized crime, and a police K-9. Eli Thorne, in his stiff navy suit, felt the profound weight of a stranger's fate resting on his shoulders. Lorelei Vance, seated beside her attorney Vincent Graves and Silas Creed, looked strained but resolute, the picture of a woman wronged, clutching a neatly folded handkerchief. Graves, the meticulously tailored lawyer, appeared relaxed, his strategy anchored firmly in the damaging Stockholm Syndrome testimony delivered by Dr. Harlan Reed. They had successfully framed Eli's heroic intervention as psychological manipulation, and the jury of public and legal opinion remained divided. The first blow of the morning came swiftly and unexpectedly, delivered not by Eli's defense, but by the organized crime task force. Detective Marcus Cole, summoned back to the stand by an urgent, whispered request from Ms. Sophia Chen, took the witness box. Cole, his silver-streaked beard trimmed sharp, maintained his unflappable composure. He delivered a concise, devastating statement that, based on wire fraud and money laundering evidence, Silas Creed had been formally rearrested that morning, not on state child abuse charges, but on multiple federal counts related to the loan shark recovery scam. Cole further testified that Lorelei Vance was currently under investigation for complicity and conspiracy, having demonstrably benefited from the laundered funds. The court gasped. Lorelei's carefully constructed facade of victimhood instantly crumbled. Her face, usually so composed, fractured into raw panic, her eyes darting desperately towards Graves, who, for the first time in the entire trial, looked genuinely blindsided, his expensive charcoal suit suddenly appearing rumpled. The prosecution's move effectively neutralized Graves's core defense. Lorelei could no longer credibly claim ignorance, nor could she be considered a fit, uncompromised mother. With the criminal threat neutralized, the focus returned to Finn's healing and Eli's fitness as a guardian. Ms. Chen called Dr. Clara Hayes to the stand. Dr. Hayes, composed and credible in her wool cardigan, testified eloquently about Finn's deep-seated trauma and his exclusive reliance on Ragnar as his emotional firewall. She produced the art therapy drawings, the chaotic black shadow, the tiny isolated blue stick figure, and the constant silver shield of the German Shepherd. She then introduced the final, small drawing Finn had made the previous night after Eli showed her the subtle crayon image, the drawing where the Lorelei stick figure held the black USB cable. Dr. Hayes testified not to the truth of the image, but to the meaning. This is a direct, uncoached, and undeniable psychological association. In Finn's mind, his mother was inextricably linked to the instrument of his pain, confirming her role not as a passive victim, but as an active, complicit threat to his safety. Graves, recovering his composure, stood for cross-examination, his tone laced with venom. He attempted to dismiss the drawing as mere childish fantasy, then returned to his central, devastating theme, the Stockholm Syndrome. Dr. Hayes, Graves interrogated, his voice rising, isn't it true that Finn Vance is simply bonding to the nearest powerful force, the officer's weapon, because his father figure, Mr. Creed, was eliminated by the same force? He is not healed. He is coerced into loyalty by a trained attack dog, correct? Dr. Hayes stood firm, but the judge, Judge Rachel Young, a formidable woman in her late 50s, whose black robe and severe silver bun lent her an air of absolute non-nonsense authority, intervened. Judge Young, having listened patiently to weeks of testimony, now spoke directly, her voice cutting through the tension. Counsel, I believe the court has sufficient psychological testimony. However, this court is not interested in academic theories. This case is about the well-being of a 5-year-old boy whose voice has been silenced by terror. I believe it is time we hear from the only other constant witness. A low murmur rippled through the courtroom. Eli's heart hammered against his ribs. Judge Young turned to Eli. Officer Thorne, bring in your K-9 partner. Eli swallowed hard. This was unprecedented. He stepped out and returned a moment later with Ragnar, the black and silver German Shepherd, wearing his K-9 service harness, walking with disciplined stillness beside Eli's leg. Ragnar was imposing, his massive frame radiating quiet power, yet his amber eyes remained soft, focused only on Eli. The sight of the highly trained dog entering the solemn courtroom silenced every cough, every whisper. Finn Vance, sitting in a quiet observation room with Ms. Hayes, was watching the proceedings on a monitor, his attention completely absorbed by the appearance of his protector. Judge Young addressed Eli. Officer Thorne, this court will observe the dog's reaction to the primary parties involved. This is not a circus, counselors, she warned Graves and Chen. This is an observation of an established support bond. Eli led Ragnar slowly down the aisle. As they passed Lorelei Vance, the dog registered her presence with a single, sharp glance, but remained still, merely a slight tightening of the leash, his only reaction. As they approached Silas Creed, however, Ragnar's composure instantly fractured, his ears pinned back, a low, guttural growl, the same sound Eli had heard that freezing day in the blizzard, vibrated deep in his chest. Ragnar pulled subtly against the leash, his massive head turning to lock his amber gaze on Creed. The message was clear, primal, and utterly undeniable. Threat. Eli commanded Ragnar to heel, and the dog immediately complied, but the air remained thick with the canine's silent aggression aimed solely at Silas. Eli then led Ragnar to the witness stand, where Eli lifted the dog's large head so his muzzle was visible above the barrier. Judge Young looked directly at the impressive animal, then at Eli. Officer Thorne, Dr. Reed posited that this canine represents coercion and threat. In your expert opinion, what does Ragnar represent to Finn Vance? Eli answered, his voice strong with conviction. Your Honor, Ragnar represents an unshakable boundary. He is the physical manifestation of safety that Finn lacked. He is the one who took the blow, literally and figuratively, to protect the child. And in Finn's traumatized mind, he is the only one who has ever kept his promise. The judge then fixed her attention on Silas, then back to Eli. The defense suggests Finn's fear is manufactured. Officer Thorne, let the K9 approach the defense table. Eli hesitated. The tension was unbearable. He knew Ragnar would react. He led the dog closer to Silas. Ragnar's snarl deepened, pulling harder against the lead, his focused aggression escalating. Silas Creed, even cloaked in his respectable suit, visibly recoiled, his face pale with fear and hatred for the dog that had foiled him. The contrast was stark. The abuser was terrified of the protector. Finally, Judge Young spoke, her voice ringing with finality. This court finds sufficient and overwhelming evidence. The medical testimony proves physical battery. The financial and criminal evidence proves the mother's complicity and compromised judgment. And the uncoached testimony of the child's protective bond with the K9 proves the child's need for an absolute, unwavering source of safety, which Lorelei Vance and Silas Creed repeatedly failed to provide. Based on these facts, and the immediate criminal threat posed by both defendants, the motion for termination of parental rights is granted. The courtroom erupted in a flurry of hushed shouts and movement. Lorelei shrieked, collapsing into tears. Graves looked defeated. Mr. Creed and Ms. Vance, Judge Young declared, gavel striking the oak desk once, a sharp, decisive sound. You are hereby remanded into federal custody. The bond is revoked. Furthermore, the court is issuing a permanent restraining order. You will never approach Finn Vance again. He will be transferred immediately to the protective custody of Officer Elias Thorne, effective immediately. Eli closed his eyes, relief washing over him with blinding force. The judge looked toward the observation room. And I believe a certain little boy needs his hero right now. The Minneapolis winter, relentless for months, finally began its long, reluctant retreat. Outside the modest Linden Hills bungalow that now represented safety, the deep snow was yielding to slush and the faint promise of spring runoff, mirroring the slow, deliberate thawing of 5-year-old Finn Vance's spirit. The final, decisive gavel strike by Judge Rachel Young echoed not just the end of the custody battle, but the collapse of the entire Creed-Vance facade. Silas Creed and Lorelei Vance were immediately remanded into federal custody, their sophisticated legal defense dissolving against the weight of the federal wire fraud charges and the unshakable testimony of a K9. Eli Thorne, sitting on the small cot in the sunroom that evening, his suit finally discarded for his comfortable flannel shirt, read the final decree again. Custody granted permanently to Elias Thorne. The stranger who had broken a window to save a life was now, legally and emotionally, a father. But victory in court was only the prologue to the arduous work of healing. Finn, now officially in Eli's care, was still a profoundly bruised soul. He was safer, yes, but the ingrained fear manifested in daily rituals. He flinched violently at the sound of the refrigerator ice dispenser, refused to leave Ragnar's side even for baths, and his small, abused hands remained tightly curled, a silent refusal to fully engage with the world. Dr. Clara Hayes, the art therapist, transitioned from being a court witness to being the chief architect of Finn's recovery. She advised Eli that true healing required Finn to re-experience the elements of his trauma in a safe context, effectively reprogramming the fear associated with the abusive object and action. The object, the strike on the palm. The action, the sudden, sharp, commanding movement of a dominant figure. Eli, ever the disciplined officer, approached this therapeutic challenge with the meticulous precision of a K9 trainer. He recognized that the traumatic memory, Silas forcing Finn to extend his palm before the brutal strike, was still physically locked in the boy's reflexes. The only tool Eli trusted to mediate this fear was Ragnar. The German Shepherd, whose unwavering loyalty had secured their victory in court, now had his final mission. Eli began with small, careful steps at Doris's kitchen table, where Finn still resided. Eli himself took over the simple task of clipping Finn's fingernails, a routine chore that, given the history of the abused palms, was loaded with agonizing significance. Eli would approach Finn with the clippers, and the boy would immediately recoil, his eyes wide with the remembered terror of his stepfather forcing his hand out to be struck. Eli never forced him. Instead, he would wait, motionless, until Ragnar intervened. Ragnar, the observant K9, would sense the child's distress. The dog would nudge Finn's hand with his massive, warm muzzle, slowly, insistently, until Finn, in his profound trust for his protector, would relax his tightly clenched fingers just enough for Ragnar to rest his head gently on the boy's palm. It was Ragnar's silent assurance. The dominant hand is safe. The command is gentle. Only then, with Ragnar's head providing the comforting weight and heat, would Finn allow Eli to quickly and gently trim his nails. This seemingly simple ritual, repeated daily, slowly began to detach the small, sharp click of the nail clipper from the memory of the sharp smack of the cable. The memory remained, but the context was rewritten by safety and love. The progress was tangible. Finn began to speak again, softly at first, his voice small and tentative, asking questions only of Ragnar. "Do you want cheese, Rags? Is it warm outside?" Eli found himself talking to his son through the dog, relaying his own thoughts and affection via the K9's presence, a temporary but necessary shield. Eli knew he had to solidify his new paternal role, moving beyond the uniform and the K9. He made a permanent career decision, requesting a transfer to the MPD's K9 Training and Community Outreach Division. This allowed him to keep Ragnar by his side for therapeutic support, while reducing the dangerous, unpredictable street hours that had once defined him. The man who had once been defined by the stark isolation of his job was now defined by the complex, demanding, and utterly rewarding demands of fatherhood. Weeks later, the transfer was approved. Eli officially moved Finn and Ragnar out of Doris's safe harbor and back to his Linden Hills bungalow. Doris, the steadfast neighbor, watched the departure from her porch, her eyes wet but smiling. Finn didn't look back. Instead, he waved excitedly at Doris, his hands no longer clenched, before turning and burying his face in Ragnar's neck. Eli had the sunroom repaired, replacing the shattered glass with a thick, insulated, secure panel, a symbolic gesture of repairing the rupture in their new fragile family unit. He reorganized the room, replacing the trauma cot with a low, comfortable sofa covered in thick, soft blankets, turning the former scene of their trauma and temporary shelter into Finn's permanent reading and play space. One sunny afternoon, Eli found Finn in the sunroom. The boy, now wearing a bright yellow t-shirt and jeans, was sitting on the floor with a set of crayons, Ragnar's massive head resting in his lap. Finn was drawing. This time, the image was not a chaotic black shadow. It was a bright, sprawling sun, drawn with bold, confident yellow strokes. Beneath the sun were three connected figures, one large man, one small boy, and one very large dog, drawn with painstaking detail in black and silver. The man's hand was not reaching out to strike. It was resting gently on the dog's neck. Finn looked up, his gray-blue eyes clear for the first time since Eli had met him. He had completed the drawing, signing it in careful, slightly uneven letters. "Me and Dad and Ragnar. Home." Eli knelt beside him, his gaze soft. He was no longer the officer responding to a crime. He was just Dad. "It's a beautiful picture, buddy," Eli said, his voice husky. Finn looked at the drawing, then directly into Eli's eyes. He slowly extended his small, no longer bandaged hand, the hand that had been the primary victim, and placed his palm flat against Eli's cheek. It was a gesture of unreserved trust, a quiet, monumental breakthrough. "Ragnar says, he says thank you," Finn whispered, his voice thin but clear, the words spoken directly to Eli, without the K9's mediation. Eli closed his eyes, leaning into the soft, small palm. That single, uncoerced gesture of human connection was the final gavel, the ultimate verdict. It was the promise of spring finally fulfilled. The final verdict on that cold Minneapolis winter day was not delivered by a judge's gavel, but by a small, trusting hand placed against a father's cheek. It is in the quiet aftermath of the storm that true miracles unfold. the miracle of a child choosing courage over fear, the miracle of a stranger choosing permanent sacrifice over temporary duty, and the extraordinary grace embodied by an animal whose loyalty broke the chains of trauma. Faith isn't found in avoiding the darkness, but in recognizing the light, the fierce, protective light of a dog's love, the steady light of human devotion, when it breaks through the shattered glass. If this story of salvation and loyalty moved you, please share it so someone trapped in silence can find a voice. Comment below with one word that describes the bond between a hero and his dog. May God bless you and keep your loved ones safe.